So one of the points I think we should get into is that I think the reason these issues keep coming up time and time again is I just feel that it's the revenue streams that come in. The two big issues as I see it, for me, the ones that really frustrate me is that, these orgs, they spend massively overinflated player salaries because they don't want to create value in players. They don't want to scout. They don't want to, be smart. They don't want to get together and create an academy league or any of this stuff. They just want to have the best players. So you end up with the Sword Art deal at TSM, and he was absolute trash anyway. So it's, so they spend and they spend and they spend. But they misrepresent their numbers all the time. Like, our industry has had such a fucking problem with people throw money at things that don't exist. I don't know many people who work at an esports org that when it comes to full transparency about their number, they're just not full of shit. And I'm talking about even like owners I get along with, you're full of shit. Like people who are on the middle tier map, full of shit. They're all full of shit. They all lie. All their numbers are garbage. And then when people get wise to a number, they just invent a new metric entirely and say, no, this was the most important one all along. And everyone's full of shit about that. So I want to talk a little bit about that. And the other thing I want to talk about is just money coming in. Like, when you actually dupe the sponsors into investing in this broken shit industry, like, it's never sustainable. Like 100 Thieves we're talking about. They had, I mean, I know it's crypto, but they had that Cash App deal. It was like, going to be like a 10, like not 10, they weren't 10, it was tier 7%, but it was like a 5-year, 5-6 year deal. And obviously that's not there. There's no money. They have other people like coming in for a year or two. They do these merch drops. They do these like, 500,000 like one-off activations. What the money that comes in is so infinitely small compared to what they spend to go out. And it's like, they're even spending really dangerous money before it's even arrived. I mean, like, even Riot Games has done this with LCS, with FTX. You think it's any coincidence that the FTX was then the big, $21 million a year deal, and it was on the LCS, and now the LCS is massively contracting, and they're they're downsizing it. You think maybe the fact that their fucking, $210 million sponsorship deal like drying up had something to do with that? So I want to talk about these 2 points because it seems to me that like it's bullshit out, and it's not enough coming in, and I think it's been like that since the day I arrived in esports, actually.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think somebody should actually do this analysis because I think it would be really interesting. Richard, when you find yourself bored on a weekend afternoon, somebody should go through like some of the bigger organizations that have been around for like a decade and just look at their renewals history in terms of sponsorships. Because I think that's a pretty telling metric for how teams are servicing the agreements that they have versus like the expectations that they laid out before. Like I think if you're renewing the same partnerships, then you probably sold them at like reasonable numbers and like delivered against expectations. And if every single time you're up for renewal, you switch to a new brand, no matter how sexy it might seem at the time, then like probably, sometimes I'm sure you just got a better offer and like that's fair. But I'm sure there's also times when like you just did not end up doing all so well. And so like I think that would be an interesting thing to look at.
Sure.
On the crypto side, it's actually interesting because when Monte messaged me about doing this podcast, which I don't remember how long ago it was, and I think the way he laid it out was like we should talk about like this crypto stuff, some other stuff. So I spent like some time thinking about it when we were supposed to do this earlier, and it's interesting to think about like if you're given an offer for let's just say you're TSM and you have like all this inventory for your LCS team, and you could have all of it be against FTX at 10 million a year, 20 million a year, whatever the number was reportedly, or you could have 50 sponsors at
Right.
call it 20 sponsors at $1 million a year, like that becomes really hard because it's really hard to service 20 sponsors. Like it gets really expensive just having all the activations people, the relationship people, like all the time it takes to keep 20 sponsors happy. On the other hand, like having one single company committed for all of it, like that's super risky, obviously. Like, you know, in reality, you're never going to be at one of those, you know, one of those like ultimate ends. Like you'll be somewhere in the middle. But with crypto in particular, given that like in many cases, you know, there's like no, it wasn't even like close to being a competitor to like any other category. And so the only question was like, how much inventory did you have left when some of the big crypto companies came into the scene? It becomes like an interesting game theory question of like, what should you allocate? Because there's, you know, many of the big teams got like really big wins from crypto related sponsorships. Like I'm sure the deals that people got were just like absolutely massive. Like our teams got pretty big deals. They're not the biggest names in there, but they got pretty big deals. And like now, like I know on our end things are looking, you know, things are looking good, but I've also seen reports that for many of the others in the industry, like things are not so much. So we've just candidly gotten lucky in that regard. But like it's a tough question to say like, oh, like, so do you turn down the huge amount of money? Like, should you rather say like, oh, Richard, you want to give me 10? No, you know what? I'll take 3 and I'll find somebody else to take the other 7. Like it becomes like it becomes a hard decision if like that's kind of the situation.
Yeah,
that
I think essentially the orgs are too greedy. Like they just say like, let's find a way to make the 10.
Well,
Even though, as you're saying, there's only so many like activations you can do.
In my experience, there's absolutely no deliberation process whatsoever.
Right.
And in fact, I mean, I'm just gonna say this, like with the FTX stuff, that between the fine minds at TSM and the marketing geniuses at Riot, I mean, keep in mind, like as Tommy rightly said, there were a number of red flags around FTX. Like I know fuck all about crypto and crypto exchanges. I watch a CoffeeZilla video. That's like how I get my shit. There were definitely red flags. I know,
what's mad? I might be so off base on this, Richard, but just the thing they did where they were trying to make that guy seem awesome because he was like, I'm trying to give away all the money. That alone to me before I even knew was right? Like, holy, I'll never be in business with this guy. Who the fuck? He's trying to give it all away. Like I want him to be like, I'm the most evil piece of shit, Scrooge. Yeah, that guy. Get me that guy. I want to work with him. He's gonna have the vault of gold.
Know, you had this weird like when they trotted him out. I thought he was like some like 18-year-old savant, and then it was like, no, he's just a 29-year-old weirdo with wheelie bin tits, and you know, like, oh, brilliant. This is great. This is the guy that's gonna fucking, you know, they were, what was it they put on that magazine where they said he was going to be like the new Warren Buffett or something? It was something insane like
JP Morgan.
Next JP Morgan.
JP Morgan, because he was bailing out crypto companies, as it turns out, just to bail himself out.
Yes, exactly. Perfect. So it's like there were definitely alarm bells there, and this is the thing. It's like, you know, you brought up Astralis earlier, Tommy. They're another one. Everyone forgets about it. They took $1 million, I think it was, not euros, from that esports.com IPO, right? And they had financial criminals involved with their shit, and that just quietly went away, and no one ever brings it up ever again. And it, you know, people say yes to the dodgiest money, case opening sites that are like just mad, unscrupulous bullshit. Like not even like, yeah, case opening in games. We can have a debate about that, right? Like, you know, whatever. I'm talking about third party case opening sites where the case isn't real. It's a figment of your fucking imagination, dickhead. They have to have a bot that goes and finds that item. What do you think they're doing with the odds? Of course they're fucking you. They were throwing a ton of money into CS, particularly like, you know.
By the way, the individual players more than anything, by the way, around like the 2016, 2017 era.
Oh, when they used to all have all the name of this on the skin of the there were loads of that shit.
Ridiculous. And so you know, at the end of the day, like what I would like to see from these, like, I can't sympathize with the orgs because there has to be a process where it's like, yes, crypto, it's $10 million. Anyone who's ever bought shitcoin knows crypto is the most ephemeral, volatile investment you're ever going to make. But you have got literal entire organizations with people's employment future at stake. You know, an entire brand that in some cases, the dickhead signing the crypto deal didn't build it. You know what I mean? And they're just gonna fuck it up. And so it's like you've got to have a long, hard talk with yourself. Yes, $10 million sounds great, but it's $10 million of pie in the sky bullshit. Or you can have $1 million, very real $1 million with something that's a lot smaller. And I think the problem is like esports orgs will never have that come to Jesus moment about which money is real and sustainable over the bigger number.
Yeah, I mean, like, look, there's like some level of difference where if you think there's a chance that you get paid, like it just becomes really hard to say no. But there are like other deals on the margin where I think it's a lot easier to make the difference. So like, one example I can give is like when we were negotiating the what is it called? The entitlement sponsor deal for Immortals when LCS started that. Like we felt pretty strongly that like if we could get Progressive, which was it's like obviously like a legitimate blue chip company, but also was a sponsor of Immortals in the previous season, that like that would be the priority for us to get that as a name, because like that's a company that is going to be around. Like if you give them what you promised to give them, like that's not going to cause issues. In like in that case, like that's a real company. Like you'd rather do that than take a high flyer on something. Now, like so far we've gotten, in the sense that we continue to getting paid, like we've gotten lucky, I guess, on the crypto side, and we don't have the biggest deal, obviously. We got a decent sized deal, but there is like some point at which like the kind of the diversification of revenue, just like the issue of that just becomes hard. One more point that I just want to make before you guys jump in is something you said earlier on at the beginning of this part, Richard, is kind of alluding to like people just like wanting the big wins, wanting the big numbers.
Yep.
Like that actually works on a couple of different levels, which from my experience, it's really hard to find people who want to work as like, GMs for teams that like work the way that you might think is reasonable for a team to work. You can find a lot of people who want to make, the $1 million buyouts and spend the highest payroll every year. And like we've had people that like I really like, that I think generally are smart. And like even like I would go to them when it's like time for budgeting. I would ask them to come with me for proposals, and they would give me this number and say like we think we'll be 4th in LCS, and they'd give me this number and say we'll be 5th or maybe 7th. And I'm like, okay, like so like there's a 20% chance that we make 4th for spending like this much more money. Like no way. Like like I can't believe that you're suggesting this to me, and like it's just like not real. But I think
especially because I mean the results financially from being 10th place versus 5th place in LCS is basically nothing.
Yeah.
And that's what people don't understand. Like people will say like, oh, I hate, in League of Legends, these teams that don't spend any money.
Like if you're 10th every year, then like I think you start having negative returns. But if you have variance, like, if you're 6th and then 10th and then like 8th and then 6th, like that's fine. But being 4th, like that's not, you either make worlds or you don't, really.
Right.
Yes.
And this is what I have to explain to people is that what you're angry at is you're not angry at the teams. You're angry at the system that has been created. That
incentive structure.
The incentive just isn't there in order to, you either spend a lot of money to make worlds, or you're smart and you don't spend a ton of money and you exist within the kind of middle of the pack and enjoy that variance, because you're not going to get more sponsorship money as a result of being, 7th on average.
And by the way, Monte, like we all see the reports every single off season that say that like Team X and Team Y are cutting back this year, and like everybody's like laying off half their competitive staff, and they're not spending any money on buyouts, and like all of a sudden like everybody's available, like nobody's on contract, like literally like everything is up, and then like you get the new anonymized salary reports from the league. And it's like, oh, what? We're up 20% year over year. We're up 30% again, like every single year. And like, look, like on some level, like I can sympathize with that in the sense that like everybody wants to see bigger numbers. Like your investors want to see bigger numbers. The GMs want to win. Like they don't want to build like the Moneyball teams of like getting the most wins for your dollar. Like they just want to spend most money and try to win. Like that's what they care about. But like somebody's just gotta have the backbone to say like we're not going from here to here in one season. Like it's not happening. Like like the time horizon is like this, and it's probably also like this move. And so like, instead of like this, you're actually doing this. That's the story that people just don't want to tell, because it's a hard story. By the way,
it's not a sexy story to be like, yeah, we're going to increase by average 1 place over the next 3 years, as opposed to we're going to jump up 5 places within 1 year.
It's a lot harder story still if you sold 2 years ago that you were already going to be here. That's where it becomes really tricky. If you said 3 years ago that we'll just kind of do the smart thing and sometimes we'll outperform, sometimes we won't. If you've said that, you're probably fine, but very few people say that because, again, if you're the senior executive, unless you have a very specific type of ownership group that prioritize that kind of thing, don't just want the sexy headlines, etc., the fastest possible growth, the top of the Forbes ranking, whatever, then it might also impact your comp, for instance. And so there's all these incentives that, make it easier to understand, I should say, of why so many people end up in that place.
So, by the way, as a quick aside, this is actually the maddest thing that I think a lot of us learned from the Flashpoint experiment. It's why we spent so much of that first year trying to get this thing where we could find the teams, right? When you first start a project like Flashpoint, you treat everyone like an adult, right, we're all adults who understand what we're trying to do in the long term. And then eventually you actually, by the end, they're just cattle. And you're like, right, so I need a prod that makes him go down this ramp. And then how do I get him to go up the steps though? I've tried asking him. No, he's an animal. He wouldn't understand that. I need to make him want to go up the stairs. It's mental, mate. That's at the end. That's what you feel like. You feel like, as you say, Monte, you don't get mad at the teams. You're you've got to design this farm better. You're getting the cows down here, mate. That's what it feels like at the end.
Why are there stairs? Why are there stairs?
Exactly. But to the point, this is where we are with the franchising model right now. And it is what it is. It's been constructed in a certain way. And we've been dancing around this topic a little bit, but obviously the biggest issue in esports historically and continues to be is the revenue issue. As Richard said earlier, fans don't want to pay for things. They have been, in the early days of esports, people were excited to pay for things. I had a Golem TV subscription that I used to watch StarCraft Brood War and StarCraft 2 when they started that. And you know what? I paid $20 a month in 2009, and I thought this was a fucking amazing deal because I was getting tons of content. I could stream it. I got the live. I got the video on demand. I thought it was rad. And then here come the developers, and they say, no, this is all free because it's marketing for our fans. And they kind of messed up the pay-per-view, and then later on messed up, wasn't entirely their fault, but the media rights deals. And, we've just seen the media rights deal with Activision Blizzard and YouTube that has now gone away this year. And suddenly, CDL is back on Twitch. We can assume that Overwatch League in the coming year will also be on Twitch without a big media rights deal. And we know that fans typically don't spend a lot of money compared to traditional sports fans, at least in the market analysis that has been done, which, I take with a grain of salt. But at least in terms of the market analysis that has been done, we know that fans don't spend a lot of money on team merch compared to traditional sports fans or other, they don't spend a lot of money on tickets going to live events. Tickets in esports are generally cheap or free for a lot of events. And so we've come to this problem where, as you say, from the team side, you're kind of getting squeezed. I think the teams are getting squeezed the most because the developers, they know how effective their marketing for esports is. No one else knows exactly how much money that they are tying to their marketing efforts in esports. And the players are doing well because they can continue to increasingly demand higher salaries. They were floated by venture capital that is not sustainable in the long term. And so the teams are kind of just caught in the middle. And yes, now you receive stipends from the publishers. And that's indeed the change in Valorant that's coming, is that now it's just kind of a tacit admission that this is a marketing exercise because there is no upfront fee. They're just paying you straight out of the gate in order to participate in their esport and bring your brand value and bring your expertise in running the teams. So where do you think are that was a lot, but where do you think are the biggest revenue problems within esports right now? And how do you think we should tackle some of these issues?
Well, if I was the gaming czar and I could just redesign things such that they would work for everybody, then what you could easily do is you could just figure out a way for game publishers to revenue share something for the teams. And the game publishers are so large that would easily fix it now.
We would all like that to happen.
Yeah, that I don't see that happening. And so then you move down the line to what are the other options? I think ultimately, like, you have to get the fans to pay. The challenge with that is we could have solved that such that the payment would have been advertising through media rights if fans were willing to watch on another platform, which is the weirdest thing that I've still never understood.
People don't know. This is an area where me, Tommy, and Richard took so much shit about 4 years ago when ESL did that deal with the Facebook deal. Because the premise was, and let me state this very clearly so there's no confusion, we were never people who said Facebook will be an amazing platform, the tech's awesome, it'll be better than Twitch. What we always said was, this is step one, though, of actually going to a world where there'll be rights and people have to actually pay for it. So even though, look, we understand it was shit, they didn't have the tech, it was terrible, it didn't work, but had no viewership. But like that basically, for me, sadly, I think that's the fork, and we've never gone back to the route.
Well, keep in mind as well. So that video, I did a video why the Facebook deal is actually a good thing, where I try to explicitly explain. That's the most disliked video I think on my channel, right? And when you consider
that's in sports fans, by the way. Even though your video is explaining like a point there, like if we dislike it on this video platform, though, that will solve esports' problems. Like,
but you have to remember at that time it wasn't just Facebook, which was an ass platform. It sucked. It wasn't good. You had to be logged into a Facebook account. It revealed your name if you chatted. I mean, this is a nightmare. Like, but you know, at the end of the day, it was a way to generate competition and force Twitch to think about, you know, which content do we want to buy and how much do we want to bid for it. But this was also a time when the average CS fan said, "Fuck YouTube."
Oh, that's right. Yes. Yeah, they did.
Well, because they couldn't, because there was no Twitch chat, there was no PogChamp and all this stuff, right? And like,
which has still aged so fucking. It was literally PogChamp that they wanted, Richard.
PogChamp's a hate crime now.
That's amazing. Right? I know.
So, right, this is how mad it was. People now say, "Oh, YouTube has really leveled up their game. It's the superior tech." It was always the superior tech. It was always.
I'm not exaggerating, Richard. When I do my watch parties, by default, I have to tell people, make sure you watch the Twitch stream, though, because every person I've met so far in the industry just watches the YouTube stream because the tech's about 1 billion times better.
Yeah, well, right, because these are things you could always do, even when fans rejected it, just because of the market dominance of Twitch. They didn't think critically. Like, you could rewind. Twitch didn't have 4K. This was at a time when YouTube had just moved to 4K. The automatic VODs, like going like also as well. It was also at a time when I think Twitch was sort of like trying to level up in terms of server. There were certain countries where Twitch was just a laggy service for you if you were, you know, if you lived in a certain part of the world. So, but the fans widely rejected it because what they were used to is watching a game, and every time a player does something good, type in PogChamp. And you're right, that was such a huge fork in the fucking road for where the industry went, driven by dog shit moron fans who now pretend that we were never the dog shit moron fan. They're like, no, YouTube's always been great. Fuck Twitch. What even is PogChamp? Is it a snake now? Like, fuck you. You
guys, I'm blaming you. You guys killed esports for PogChamp. You made that trade. You made that trade.
Like, keep in mind, by the way, we're never like that was like just before esports was like about to hit its peak. Like, it was the, you know, pre-pandemic. It's the 2016 era we're talking about. You had ECS, you know, Face It had their league. You had loads of leagues popping off. Everybody was getting better and better production. It was a point of pride if your broadcast looked good. Teams were commanding fees to even attend tournaments. Everyone was trying to create exclusivity and secret. That was the golden era, and fans, because of an emote on Twitch chat, basically stopped it getting to. Who knows where we would be now? You know?
By the way, to tie it back in, because
ruined the esports. I think that's where we're.
Well, the joke is, aside from someone who
ruined esports,
aside from someone really dying in real life, that was actually the biggest real impact of that whole fucking event. Sadly, was that it just ruined the PogChamp emote. No, by the way, to loop it back into what Lurpus was saying, because I know actually, if people don't know, Tommy in the world of real sports and outside of esports is someone who is like your primary audience to buy these fucking passes. Like, I know you're like me, Tommy. Like, I'm at the point now, for example, I used to do the same thing everyone everyone did, watch like the illicit UFC stream at like 4 a.m. And then what happened is eventually you realize, like, one, I'm an adult. Two, I've got the money. Like, I actually want to pay to have the proper stream. I don't want the like stream to break during the fight, like, you know.
Content creators, so they keep creating the content that you want. That you
exactly.
Want to see.
I used to have to pirate Game of Thrones because HBO literally wouldn't sell me a streaming service. The instant they sold me a streaming service, that Tomi,
subscribed. He's in that position now. The joke is he is like the please take my money guy. Like, we actually want fucking good packages. We can pay for premiums. So how do we get there? Is the question.
I mean, look. I think the only way to solve this problem at this point in time is such a crazy idea that I just doubt it would ever happen. So here's what I think you have to do, and this is never going to happen. I think you have to get all of the major game publishers and ESL and Blast together, create an esports streaming platform where all of esports lives, charge a subscription for it, and then divide the revenue by according to how many hours of whatever are watched on the platform.
Now, I have a similar plan to save esports that also involves gathering all of those people in one area, but mine ends very differently, Monte.
You launched them into space on Elon Musk's rocket.
Just put him in a self-driving Tesla crossing the Bay Bridge. That'll do the same trick. To bring us back to regular programming. So what I was going to say is, I do remember that time. I remember I wrote on the way to I think it was the Boston Major. I was flying to New York. I wrote like a Fragbind column on the way. And like, if you can still go look it up on Reddit, it has like million posts that are just like, this guy's a moron. Facebook sucks. Like, it's the worst streaming service. Yep. And, I did learn at that time that apparently streaming is not a commodity product because you could fuck it up, and Facebook did. And like their numbers look bad because, like Richard said, they didn't count you if you weren't logged in. And so like people to stop, nobody was watching regardless of what the viewership numbers were. And it was just like bad for PR, people ridiculed it, etc. Like all these things mattered. Ultimately, though, the fact that people won't move is why nobody else will pay for streaming. Like Google or YouTube said to us in like, I think it was 2019, we're talking like early 2019, where we started talking about the Flashpoint product. They basically said like, guys, like we'll throw something like, we want this to succeed, blah, blah, blah. But like, it's not the industry, like nobody's going to watch. And then like when Mixer spent all that money on like the kind of the influencer streamer side and they still couldn't get anybody, like that really killed it. And now I don't know how you get people to move over. And if you don't get people to move over, nobody's paying for those rights. The only way...
Think how crazy that is. That actually implies, and people haven't let this penny drop, that implies Ninja's fans aren't Ninja's fans. They're just people who are on Twitch, that if Ninja's on Twitch, will watch Ninja. What that implies is actually really dark for the... It's pretty dark for the fucking industry.
Channel browsing, essentially, on Twitch. But the crazy thing is, like, if you're, like an avid computer user, or whichever thing you use to watch streams, like CTV or whatever, like it's simple enough to switch things. Like I'll go from Twitch to like CBS to Fox for the next football game to ESPN for like whatever's there later. Like I can change channels. Like I'm there for the content, not the channel, and like the other people in the audience like doing whatever in terms of Twitch chat in this case. But if you can't move people, the only way these streaming deals move is really by cloud spend, because that's the other thing that moves things. I mean, that's like how Microsoft, for example, justified on their earnings call a lot of the Activision deal. It's like they can just get so much of they can move all of Activision's cloud spend on Azure, and that already covers like a meaningful part of the total acquisition price. And so if you can't do that, like you have to make users pay, because that's the only way. Now, like, I actually do know from talking to Valve that they're open to doing pay-per-view. Like, they wouldn't do it with the major, but they would let other people do it. Other people do it. The problem is, like, somebody would have to take the shot, and
let
like,
me guess.
Nobody's there yet.
In Counter-Strike, they'll allow it to happen, but definitely not in Dota.
I wouldn't know. See, I don't... See, my expertise that's way short of there.
Because let me tell you, one of the wildest things while we're referencing ancient history I ever saw was, keep in mind, ESL, like running a Dota event, you don't make shit. I mean, it is one of the lowest returns, potential returns zero returns. Esport, you can probably run an event in. And ESL were doing a major, and they had a major go out. I can't remember which one it was.
It was ESL one Genting. Was that
yeah,
right?
Genting. That was
I think it was that one.
Yeah, yeah. And they had a major go out on Facebook, and there was all this stuff going on in the background. Dota fans doing their usual entitled whining about everything because, you know, they occasionally buy a battle pass for TI, so you got to give them everything they want all of the time, and Valve do. But they were whining about that, and then obviously what happened was Valve came out and they explicitly said in a blog post, we want, like, because ESL was shutting down community streams like Admiral Bulldog and people like this who were streaming the Dota TV because Facebook was so bad. Valve came out and explicitly said it's okay to do that and fuck over the TO, and it's essentially the TO's fault for not running on a platform the community enjoys. They said a TO has a responsibility to run on a platform the community enjoys. So in other words, fuck you and your business model if you want to run a Dota event. That was Valve's official stand.
You know, if
so
you think about that,
there will never be a pay-per-view event in Dota. Fuck that.
That also gets to another one of the problems with this as a topic, by the way, which is, look at it. Every single game dev, to my knowledge, who's a major game dev, has made some stupid ultimatum like that. Like, it must be for everyone in the world to watch on Twitch. Though. It's like, then how can I ever make the fucking money? How do you're taking away all my leverage? Like that was the only leverage I had, was I could put on a different platform. Like, as far as I can tell, the game devs are the main ones in the middle of that.
So the way that resolves is like, one, you get the media rights payments, which in this structure you're not going to. If you make it pay-per-view, then it's not actually it's no longer marketing for the game publishers because it's not going to the masses anymore. And so like that actually has some downstream effects that are negative, almost certainly. And I think so in either one of these scenarios, the only way to correct it in the short term, I think, is that you just reduce what you pay the pro players. And like, candidly, I think in many of these games, like I don't have great visibility in like some of the games, but I think there's many games where you could haircut salaries fairly meaningfully, and like people would still make a very comfortable living, wouldn't have any impact. Like maybe it would take them, you know, X plus 3 years or X plus 5 years to be a millionaire instead of X years. Like maybe that's the difference. But like, I think there's plenty of room there where you first need to cut. And by the way, like that'll come down on the team side too. Like there's going to be less staff. The staff will be paid less. Like it'll go throughout the industry. But I think that's the obvious place to go. Like you just have to do more with less. And I think that, you know, has to start with talent. Because if you look at, you know, comparable industries, like typically rule of thumb, like talent takes about like half the money. Like that's what happens in like all the American sports, for instance. I think if you looked at all of the most popular teams in esports, like that number is way north of 50. In these, like in particular for like these popular games. And so I actually bet you that for most of these teams, their best margins, if they were able to like fully allocate revenue, which I know is not the case because you're typically not selling on a per team basis in almost any deals. But if you could allocate revenue, I bet you in many cases, the better margins you would have would actually be on like many of these smaller games that just have like Monte said, like produce like constant hours watching like Rainbow Six or whatever the case might be, that there's a bunch of tournaments for like steady stream of content, like somewhat popular players, but are still not that popular to be highly paid. And so like I think that's kind of the obvious solution. And I think to kind of go back to what we were saying earlier, like if we're actually going to have a recession globally and, you know, brands are going to reduce spending in advertising, like that's kind of the obvious place it'll go. It's like there's going to be layoffs, which we're already seeing and have been seeing for some time. Like salaries will go down. That's going to be on the staff and the players. And like, there's going to be some people who will leave, but ultimately, like, I don't know that really matters. Like, you'll be in the same place. Like, you know, some people, like, now salaries at a high enough level that, like, you could cut in half and, like, people would still aspire to do the same. Like, if this happened in 2017 and you cut the salaries in half, I think a bunch of people would have left and it would have been hard to recover. Or, like, maybe 2016, because 2017 might have been past the kind of the investor money coming in. But you get the point.
Yeah.
See more cool, funny, interesting clips based on topics from my content? Well, subscribe to this channel then, or, you know, be a pleb and don't.